The wind came without warning, sweeping down the Appalachian mountain peaks like the breath of something ancient and restless. The dog, Milo, his fur speckled with dew, darted into the twilight woods, following a sound only he could hear. In the dark of night, his collar tag gleamed under the moon as he vanished. Hours later, they found him, standing at the edge of the forest, wet, shaking, but with empty eyes. He whimpered once, a sound too deep for a dog, and limped into the darkness without looking back. What followed was no longer Milo. Jess and Mark grew up in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in western North Carolina, just outside a small town tucked between the ridges and valleys. Their 8-year-old Labrador, Milo, was their shadow, a happy, loyal dog who loved to run through the pine needles. One weekend, they decided to hike into the woods for an overnight trip, camping near an old logging path under the stars. That evening, around the crackling campfire, a neighbor, an old mountain man, sat and quietly reminded them of the mountain rules. Don't whistle after dark. If you hear your name called, pretend you didn't hear anything. And when everything goes quiet, close all your windows at night so you can't see outside. These sayings had been whispered for generations among the Appalachian folks, superstitions born from experience. Jess and Mark, though, just laughed it off, thinking it was charming folklore. Milo, meanwhile, lay by the fire, tongue out, happily unaware of the approaching midnight. As the darkness deepened, they pushed away any unsettling thoughts and climbed into their tent, letting the forest breathe around them. Around 11 o'clock that night, Mark stepped out to relieve himself. The moon was getting smaller, the campsite flickered with a pale light. He heard it, a soft whistle floating through the trees like a flute carried by the wind. He froze. Milo stood up and stared into the darkness, his ears perked. Jess? But in the forest, the silence swallowed the name. A second whistle answered, softer, closer, coming from where there was no path. Mark rushed back. Milo came trotting, his tail low, his usual happiness gone. The old neighbour's rule echoed in Mark's mind. Never whistle at night in the Appalachians, or they will answer you. They quieted the dog, zipped up the tent, and tried to sleep, but the whistle had woken something much older. Midnight! The fire died down. Jess woke up to a noise outside the tent. Mark! My ark! A voice whispered his name. Her heart pounded with fear. She told herself it was the wind, but the whisper came again, softer, closer. She nudged Mark. He sat up quickly, shining his flashlight into the darkness. They held their breath. Milo's leash was loose. The dog was gone. They unzipped the tent and found his bed empty, with his collar tag still attached. They went into the woods, calling for him. Leaves rustled, branches snapped. Then silence. And from above, a low grunt, not quite dog, not quite human. Milo's distant bark answered. They followed the sound to a clearing. There he was, but standing in a strange way, head tilted, face slack, eyes glowing amber. A battered collar hung loose. He didn't wag his tail. He just stared. That wasn't him. They picked him up and hurried back to town, thinking, well, safety was in the lit streets and warm walls of home. That night, as they lay in bed, the house became completely silent. No wind, no faraway trucks, no hoot of an owl. It was the kind of silence old mountain stories warned about. When everything goes quiet, close your windows so you don't see outside." Jess, feeling uneasy, crept down the hall to check the windows. She saw one barely open a crack. A thin beam of moonlight was sneaking in. Outside, in the driveway, Milo stood at the edge of the window's glow, but his eyes reflected too much moon. He barked once, a long, drawn-out echo that didn't sound like the dog she knew. His tail wasn't wagging. Then he turned, stepping softly into the darkness between the houses, fading into the woods again. Jess couldn't move. The next morning, his collar tag was on the doormat. Milo was gone. The forest was quiet now, at least in Jess's mind. She stared at the empty leash on the hallway wall. Outside the window, the mountains stood in shadow, silent as if holding their breath. The neighbor's words echoed, "If they call your name, pretend you didn't hear." She wanted to close her eyes, but she was afraid of what she would dream. Time seemed to stand still. 6 weeks later, Jess, unable to sleep, went back to the mountaintop, to where they had camped. She only had a flashlight and some dog treats, half hoping, half scared. The trail was overgrown. The wind whispered through the pine trees, and the moon peeked through the clouds. She stopped at the old fire pit. The smell of ash lingered, even after months. "Milo," a faint bark answered. She followed it, deeper into the darkness. Suddenly, the ground sloped down into a hollow she didn't remember. The whistling came back, soft, mocking, carrying her own voice inside. "Jess! Jess!" She froze. Another rule. If you hear your name, pretend you didn't hear it. The legend said that the mountain voices would mimic loved ones to lure travelers into the woods. She forced herself to stand firm. At the bottom of the hollow, she saw him, Milo, or what was left of him. His fur was ragged, ribs showing. He limped towards her, swaying, but his eyes, they had a cold glow, too old, too wise. He opened his mouth and let out a low growl that turned into human laughter. Jess screamed. She turned to run, but the forest twisted behind her, the paths bending, the moonlit trail disappearing. The whistling surrounded her, echoing between pines and rocks. She turned around. Milo was 20 feet away, head down. Then he ran off, disappearing into the thicket. She ran after him, branches hitting her face, each step heavier than the last. The whistling chased her. At the top of a ridge, she saw it, a tall, dog-shaped figure, but stretched to an unsettling height, flanked by 2 pairs of glowing eyes in the darkness. The whistling turned into a shriek. She stumbled, almost falling. The figure stretched a paw hand towards her, and the 2 pairs of eyes faded into the trees. She ran until dawn. She got home, falling into the daylight, breathless. But Milo was gone again. Back home, Jess saw the collar tag on her bedside table. She picked it up. Under her fingers, the engraving felt colder than the metal itself. That very night, she heard scratching at her windows, even though she had closed them tight. She didn't turn on the porch light. She didn't open the curtains. She later learned that mountain folklore like this had inspired modern horror stories, tales of woods that change you, of the friend who comes back as something else. Some people compare old legends, like the mysterious not deer of the Appalachians, that mix animal and creature. The story of the dog that comes back but isn't yours. These stories become movies, viral podcasts, YouTube channels, all tapping into that primal fear. Jess now knows that rules matter. Don't whistle after dark. Don't answer when the night calls to you. Don't leave your windows open when silence falls. Because sometimes what's out there learns your voice. And what came back from the woods with Milo wasn't Milo. If you liked this story, share it with someone who walks under the moonlight. And subscribe so you don't miss the next whisper from the woods. Leave a comment below. What would you do if your dog came back changed? And remember, stay curious and stay safe.